What if the most terrifying thing about death isn't the unknown, but the very act of living with its inevitable shadow? For millennia, humanity has grappled with the profound dread of our own mortality. This fear, both universal and deeply personal, has shaped cultures, philosophies, and societies in ways we often fail to recognize. It is not just the finality of death itself that chills us, but the awareness of its inevitable presence at every moment of our lives. As we navigate the complexities of existence, death looms in the background, silently influencing our choices, our desires, and even our dreams. The ancient Greeks spoke of Thanatos, the god of death, who was always lurking just beyond the horizon. In Eastern traditions, the cycle of life and death is seen as an eternal dance, a reminder that everything that lives must also pass away. But what if this fear of death is more than just a natural reaction to the end of life? What if it's not death itself, but the psychological and societal constructs surrounding it that truly disturb us? The way we avoid talking about it, the way we sanitize it, the way we try to escape from it through wealth, fame, or even technological immortality. Join us as we journey into the depths of philosophy and psychology to unearth why this ancient fear still holds such a powerful grip on us all. We will explore not just the history and meaning of death, but the deeply ingrained ways in which our fear of it shapes the lives we lead today. For in understanding why we fear death, we may come closer to understanding the very essence of life itself. Death has always been a central theme in human existence, yet how we view it has evolved dramatically over time. In the earliest cultures, death was seen as a natural transition into another realm, a journey to the afterlife, where one's actions in life determined their fate. The ancient Egyptians, for instance, believed in an elaborate afterlife. For them, death wasn't an end, but a continuation. The tombs they built for their pharaohs, such as the majestic pyramids, were designed not only as final resting places, but as gateways to the next life. This belief in the immortality of the soul led to elaborate rituals meant to guide the deceased through the perilous journey of the afterlife. The Egyptians embalmed bodies, prepared offerings, and recited prayers to ensure that the soul would reach its final resting place in the afterlife, where the pharaoh would continue to reign in peace. As we move into the ancient Greeks and Romans, death was often personified, with figures like Thanatos and Hades controlling the realm of the dead. Here, death was seen less as a transition into eternal bliss and more as an inevitable end, one that must be confronted. Greek philosophers such as Socrates and Plato viewed death philosophically, with Socrates famously stating that death might either be a peaceful sleep or a passage to a greater existence. For the Romans, the fear of death was coupled with a desire for legacy, as many sought immortality through their deeds, striving to leave a mark on history to be remembered for generations. By the medieval period, death took on a much darker tone. The rise of Christianity and other monotheistic religions in the West introduced a different lens. Death was not merely a transition, but a moment of judgment. Medieval Europe was rife with fear of damnation. The concepts of heaven and hell, with the promise of eternal reward or punishment, left people terrified of what lay beyond death. Church teachings emphasized the afterlife, and people lived in constant anxiety over their sins, fearing that death could come at any moment and determine their eternal fate. But as the Enlightenment swept through Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, the perception of death began to shift. Rationalism, scientific exploration, and a growing emphasis on individualism began to challenge religious doctrines. Death once seen through the lens of divine judgment, was now understood as a biological and natural process. The scientific revolution brought new understandings of the body, the mind, and the universe, which reduced death from a theological event to a physiological one. However, despite this shift, the fear of death did not diminish. In fact, it adapted, evolving into a fear of the unknown, what happens when consciousness ends. Today, as we move into the modern age, death is often viewed through a secular, materialist lens, yet its psychological grip remains as powerful as ever. The transition from religious to scientific views didn't eliminate the fear of death, but instead gave rise to new forms of it as we grapple with questions about the meaning of life, the possibility of an afterlife, and the limits of human existence. Death is not merely a biological event. It is also deeply psychological, woven into the very fabric of our consciousness. Our fear of death is not just a reaction to the end of life. It is rooted in the existential dilemma of being aware of our own mortality. This awareness shapes the way we think, feel, and act throughout our lives. The fear of death is often unconscious, influencing our behaviors, decisions, and emotional responses, even if we are not explicitly thinking about it. One of the most influential figures in understanding the psychology of death is Ernest Becker, whose groundbreaking work in The Denial of Death argued that the awareness of our mortality is the root of many of our psychological struggles. According to Becker, humans are uniquely aware of their impending death, which creates a profound anxiety. This awareness, he suggests, is so overwhelming that we construct elaborate psychological defenses to avoid confronting it directly. We deny death's inevitability, convincing ourselves that we are invulnerable or that we can somehow escape it through legacy, material success, or the pursuit of immortality in one form or another. Becker's theory ties directly into the concept of terror management theory, developed by psychologists Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pushchinsky. TMT posits that humans' fear of death is a central motivator of much of human behavior. According to the theory, in order to manage this existential terror, we cling to cultural worldviews, belief systems, and self-esteem. These constructs offer us a sense of meaning and significance, giving us the illusion that we matter in the grand scheme of the universe, which helps mitigate the terror of our inevitable demise. For example, many of us derive meaning from religion, societal status, family legacy, or personal achievements. We tell ourselves that if we contribute to something larger than ourselves, we can transcend death. The pursuit of immortality, whether through religious belief in an afterlife or through leaving behind a lasting legacy, is not just a desire for survival, but a mechanism to ward off the existential anxiety that death brings. Moreover, research has shown that when people are reminded of their mortality, they often seek ways to bolster their self-esteem or reaffirm their belief systems. This can manifest in a variety of ways, from political ideologies that promise a certain kind of immortality or justice, to consumerist behavior, where we accumulate wealth and possessions to create a sense of lasting importance. Even the quest for fame can be seen as a response to our mortality. Artists, scientists, politicians, and even ordinary people crave to be remembered after they die, as if leaving a trace of their existence could stave off the fear of disappearing entirely. However, this terror management is not always conscious. Often we avoid thinking about death altogether. People who live in a culture that constantly emphasizes youth, beauty, and success are frequently pushed to confront their aging bodies and the inevitable decay that comes with it. The avoidance of death and the constant striving for youthfulness in modern culture can be understood as a desperate attempt to fend off the fear of mortality. At its core, Our fear of death is a fundamental driver of much of human behavior, from the actions we take to protect ourselves to the legacy we strive to create. The awareness of our mortality shapes nearly every facet of our lives. By understanding this psychological dynamic, we can begin to comprehend why the fear of death, while often unacknowledged, continues to hold such a powerful grip on us. In the modern world, death has become a paradox, both ever-present and strikingly absent. While death remains an undeniable part of life, our culture and media often perpetuates a sense of dread around it, while simultaneously sanitizing and distancing it from everyday experience. This dissonance is a significant contributor to our collective fear of death. Hollywood, along with global media, has played a pivotal role in shaping the modern narrative around death. Films, television shows, and video games often depict death as either terrifying or tragic, amplifying the emotional response of fear and loss. In horror movies, death is rarely a peaceful or quiet event. It is violent, sudden, and gruesome. From the slasher films of the 70s and 80s to the psychological thrillers and zombie apocalypses of today, the portrayal of death is one of shock and horror. Death in these narratives is seldom shown as a natural part of life. It is an enemy, something to be avoided at all costs, often to the point of obsession. Characters fight to survive, not just for their lives, but against the terrifying unknown that death represents. In addition, the tragic depictions of death, often associated with the loss of loved ones or the untimely passing of a beloved hero, further entrench the idea that death is something to be feared. Films like The Fault in Our Stars or Schindler's List center around the emotional toll of death, leaving audiences with a profound sense of sorrow and helplessness. These portrayals often focus on the pain of death, rather than its inevitability or the meaning it can bring to life. In these representations, death is positioned as a force of destruction, a tragic ending that leaves emptiness behind. However, the media also plays a role in creating a sanitized version of death that contributes to our avoidance of it. In the real world, we rarely see the rawness of death. Hospitals, funeral homes, and even the process of mourning have become private, clinical, and hidden from public view. We may read about death in the news, but the personal impact of it is often shielded from us. Families go to great lengths to protect children from witnessing death, often keeping them away from funerals or the dying process altogether. The elderly are increasingly isolated, often spending their last days in nursing homes, far removed from the presence of younger generations. Death is, in many ways, something we are expected to forget about or push out of sight, hidden behind medical technology or distant relatives. The sanitized portrayal of death makes it easier for us to live as though it doesn't exist, until, of course, it touches our lives directly. This disconnect can deepen our fear as we are forced to confront the reality of death when it is least expected. In the face of a sudden loss or a personal experience with death, we are often left unprepared, with our societal defenses crumbling. Furthermore, death remains a taboo subject in many cultures. Conversations about it are often avoided or met with discomfort. People are reluctant to talk about their own mortality or the idea of dying, even in the face of terminal illness or aging. This reluctance to acknowledge death contributes to a general atmosphere of fear. Society has a tendency to focus on youth, vitality, and success, rarely giving attention to the inevitable decline that all humans face. The idea of mortality is often treated as something to be dealt with in private or even hidden away, whether it's through denying the reality of aging, avoiding end-of-life conversations, or pretending that death doesn't happen to us. The cultural contradictions surrounding death, its frequent portrayal in horrific or tragic terms in media, contrasted with the sanitized, taboo nature of death in real life, helps to amplify the fear we feel about it. Our society's tendency to either sensationalize or avoid the topic altogether leaves us ill-prepared to confront the reality of mortality, deepening our collective anxiety and confusion.
One of the most profound aspects of our fear of death is the existential uncertainty that comes with it. What happens after we die? This is a question that has perplexed humanity for millennia, and it is precisely the inability to answer it with certainty that fuels much of our anxieties surrounding death. Whether through religious beliefs, philosophical pondering, or scientific inquiry, we have long sought to find comfort in the face of the unknown. Yet no answer fully quells the fear that we all share. The fear of what, if anything, lies beyond the threshold of life. Across cultures and throughout history, humans have developed various theories to explain the afterlife, each offering a different perspective on what death truly means. In many Eastern philosophies, death is not viewed as an end, but as part of an eternal cycle. Reincarnation, the belief that the soul is reborn into a new body, is a central tenet in religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. In these traditions, death is merely a transition and the soul's journey continues, potentially achieving enlightenment or liberation. This cyclical view of life and death offers comfort to many, as it suggests that death is not final, but part of a greater cosmic order. In contrast, Western religious views, particularly in Christianity and Islam, offer a linear perspective on life and death. Both religions hold that after death, individuals face judgment and are either rewarded with eternal life in heaven or punished with eternal damnation in hell. These doctrines offer a sense of justice and morality, giving believers a framework in which to live virtuous lives. However, the uncertainty of whether one's soul will be saved or condemned can create anxiety, particularly for those who question their beliefs or fear that they have not lived up to religious standards. At the opposite end of the spectrum lies the atheistic or secular perspective. Many atheists view death as the end of consciousness, a return to the void, where there is no afterlife, no soul, no continuation. For them, death is a biological process, a cessation of the mind and body. While this view offers a certain clarity, it also brings a chilling sense of finality. There is no hope for an afterlife, no eternal consciousness to cling to, only the quiet oblivion of nothingness. This perspective can be profoundly unsettling, as it forces individuals to confront the idea that their lives are fleeting and ultimately inconsequential in the grand scheme of the universe. The universal human desire to seek answers to the question of what happens after death is deeply rooted in our fear of the unknown. This uncertainty challenges our need for control, for understanding, and for meaning. The inability to know with certainty what awaits us after death creates a psychological void that we often seek to fill with belief, philosophy, or science. However, no matter how much we speculate, the truth remains elusive, and it is this uncertainty that amplifies the fear of death itself. Ultimately, the fear of what happens after death reflects our need to make sense of the incomprehensible. We crave a sense of continuity, a way to transcend the finality of death and assure ourselves that we matter. Whether through the hope of reincarnation, the promise of heaven, or the acceptance of oblivion, our thoughts on the afterlife provide a glimpse into how deeply our fear of death is intertwined with our need for meaning and understanding in the face of the unknown. The fear of death extends far beyond the personal. It is deeply woven into the fabric of society, influencing everything from healthcare and technology to politics and consumer culture. As individuals, we seek to shield ourselves from the reality of our mortality by accumulating wealth, seeking fame, and pursuing advances in medicine and technology. On a societal scale, this fear has given rise to systems and structures that promise safety, longevity, and even the illusion of immortality. However, in doing so, we often find ourselves trapped in a cycle of consumption, competition, and existential anxiety that drives much of modern life. One of the most significant ways in which the fear of death manifests in our society is through healthcare. We live in an age where medicine and science have made remarkable advancements. And yet, despite all these innovations, the inevitability of death remains unchanged. However, the fear of death has led to a booming healthcare industry, where the quest for longevity and the postponement of death becomes a primary focus. From anti-aging products to life-extending treatments, people go to great lengths to avoid death. This fear has given rise to the wellness industry, where everything from expensive supplements to extreme diets promises to stave off the aging process and help us live longer, healthier lives. At the same time, modern medicine has created a culture of perpetual treatment, where individuals are often kept alive well beyond their natural years, sometimes at a physical and emotional cost. The focus, rather than on accepting mortality, becomes a pursuit of endless life extension, even if that life may be riddled with suffering. Technology, too, has become a tool in our battle against death. Advances in biotechnology, genetic engineering, and cryonics all point to the growing desire to conquer death through innovation. In Silicon Valley, some of the world's wealthiest individuals are investing heavily in life extension research and artificial intelligence, hoping to achieve a form of digital immortality, living forever in a virtual space, free from the limitations of the human body. This quest for technological immortality reflects our deep-seated fear of death and our willingness to turn to anything, be it science, technology, or even the digital realm, to escape its inevitability. But the fear of death doesn't just drive our individual pursuits, it influences our societal systems as well. Consumerism, perhaps the most pervasive cultural force of the modern age, is built on our anxiety about mortality. Advertisers know that death is always lurking in the background of our consciousness, and they capitalize on this fear by promising products that offer eternal youth, beauty, or success. From luxury goods to cosmetic surgery, consumer culture encourages us to seek immortality through possessions and appearance. The more we accumulate, the more we feel as though we are transcending death, creating a lasting legacy through our wealth, beauty, or status. However, this quest for immortality through consumerism often leaves us feeling unfulfilled, as the fear of death can never truly be extinguished by material possessions. In the political sphere, the fear of death often drives the quest for power. Political systems, especially authoritarian regimes, frequently use the threat of death, whether through war, punishment, or surveillance, to maintain control. The fear of death can also fuel nationalism and militarism, as governments prey on people's anxieties about mortality and promise safety through allegiance to a cause or a nation. In extreme cases, the fear of death can lead to conflict, where leaders exploit their population's existential fears to justify violence and war. Finally, our fear of death shapes personal relationships. The awareness of mortality often leads to a deep desire for connection as we seek to leave behind something of ourselves in the form of family, friends, and legacy. We create children, form lasting friendships, and build families, all in an effort to perpetuate our existence, at least in a symbolic sense. We invest in relationships to ensure that in some way we continue to live on through others, whether through the memories we leave behind or the impact we have on their lives. The quest for immortality is not always about living forever ourselves, but about ensuring that our influence, our story, and our essence persist after death. Ultimately, the fear of death is a driving force that shapes our choices, our behaviors, and the structures of society, whether through healthcare, technology, consumerism, politics, or relationships. We continually search for ways to avoid or transcend death. And yet, in doing so, we often find ourselves trapped in a cycle of consumption, fear, and existential uncertainty, as we realize that no matter how much we accumulate or achieve,
death will always remain just beyond the horizon.
While the fear of death has shaped much of human behavior and society, there are philosophical and spiritual traditions that encourage us to confront death directly, not as an enemy, but as an inevitable part of the human experience. These perspectives do not seek to eliminate the fear of death, but rather to transform it, offering us ways to accept and live with it. One of the most profound thinkers on the subject of death was the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. Socrates faced his own death with remarkable composure. When sentenced to die by hemlock for allegedly corrupting the youth of Athens, he famously declared that death was either a peaceful sleep or a passage to a greater existence. In his final hours, Socrates embraced the idea that death was simply a natural part of life, not to be feared, but accepted. He viewed it as a release from the pains and struggles of the body, a transition into an unknown that might be just as peaceful as sleep. Socrates' acceptance of death is a powerful example of how confronting mortality can lead to a greater sense of peace and tranquility. Socrates' philosophical outlook is echoed in various spiritual traditions, many of which encourage an acceptance of death as part of life's natural flow. In Buddhism, for example, death is viewed as a transition, part of the endless cycle of life, death, and rebirth, known as samsara. Buddhists teach that attachment to life and fear of death are sources of suffering. Through meditation and mindfulness practices, practitioners learn to accept the impermanence of life and come to peace with the inevitability of death. The teachings of Buddhism suggest that by cultivating awareness and letting go of attachment, we can diminish the fear of death and embrace it as part of our spiritual journey. Stoicism, a philosophy that emerged in ancient Greece and later Rome, also offers valuable insights into confronting death. Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus taught that death is outside of our control and therefore should not be feared. They believed that living a virtuous life and accepting the inevitability of death are central to achieving inner peace. Stoicism encourages us to reflect regularly on the transient nature of life, reminding us that our time is limited and should be spent wisely. By contemplating death and the impermanence of all things, we can reduce the anxiety it generates and focus instead on living meaningfully in the present. Ultimately, these philosophical and spiritual teachings share a common thread. Death is not something to be feared or avoided, but rather something to be accepted as a natural part of existence. By confronting death, whether through the rational acceptance of it in the style of Socrates, or through the contemplative practices of Buddhism and Stoicism, we can free ourselves from the power it holds over us. In doing so, we can live with a deeper sense of peace, knowing that death is not an end, but a transition, a natural part of the ever-unfolding journey of life. As we have explored, death is not merely an event that marks the end of life. It is a force that shapes our entire existence. The fear of death, which has haunted humanity for millennia, is both a reflection of our awareness of our mortality and a profound driver of how we live, think, and interact with the world around us. But what if the greatest power that death holds over us is not in its certainty, but in how we allow it to control our lives? By shifting our perspective from viewing death as an enemy to accepting it as an inevitable part of the human experience, we may begin to unlock a deeper understanding of life itself. What if, rather than fearing death, we learned to embrace it, to understand that it gives life its meaning, its urgency, and its preciousness? Death is not something that takes away. It is what defines our limited time, urging us to make every moment count. Throughout this journey, we've seen that various philosophical, psychological, and spiritual traditions offer us tools to confront our mortality with courage and clarity.
Socrates' calm acceptance, Stoicism's focus on impermanence, Buddhism's embrace of death as part of the cycle, all encourage us to face our fears, not by avoiding them, but by accepting them as part of the natural order. It is in this acceptance that we may find freedom. So the question remains, how would we live our lives differently if we no longer feared death? What would we choose to value, to pursue, and to cherish if we knew that our time was finite and precious? Death, once accepted, can unlock a new sense of purpose, a deeper appreciation for the fleeting beauty of life. In confronting death, we may find that life itself becomes more meaningful, more vibrant, and more alive than ever before.